Good morning, everyone. You are watching the morning briefing from the German Council on Foreign Relations, the DGAP. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tim Hofmann, editor at the magazine Internationale Politik, published by the DGAP. In today's morning briefing, we want to give you an update on the current military situation in Ukraine, the Trump-Putin relationship, and Europe's efforts to support Kyiv and increase pressure on the Kremlin. In the past week, we have seen a major strategic shift in US foreign policy. For the first time since Donald Trump's return to the White House in January, his administration has imposed direct sanctions on Russia, targeting the country's two largest oil companies. While it's too soon to say how effective this move will be, its symbolic weight is undeniable. And just a couple of days later, EU leaders met in Brussels to tackle another major question: how to use frozen Russian assets to help fund Ukraine. And after difficult talks, they postponed a decision on a proposed reparations law until at least December. Meanwhile, the conversation around a possible ceasefire is picking up speed. Ukrainian and European officials are set to meet in the next days to work out details following Donald Trump's recent call for frontline freeze. So, what do these twists and turns of recent days mean, and where might they lead? These are the two guiding questions for the next 60 minutes. With us this morning is Stefan Meister, head of the Center for Order and Governance in Eastern Europe, Russia and Central Asia here at DGAP, and one of Germany's leading experts on Russia. We are also joined by András Rácz. He is a senior fellow at DGAP's Center for Security and Defense, and together with Stefan, I should add, one of our most frequent guests throughout the 3.5-year history of the DGAP morning briefing series. Last but certainly not least, I welcome Iana Okhrimenko, senior economist at the Center for Economic Strategy, a Ukrainian non-governmental research body. And at this point, I would have liked to introduce our fourth speaker, Iana from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us today for very good reasons, but we hope to have her with us for a future session. And a special thanks goes to my colleague Milan, who is currently on holidays, and I'm not sure if he could make it this morning, but he was the driving force behind today's morning briefing. So thank you, Milan. And before we kick off, just a quick reminder that today's event is being recorded and will be uploaded afterward. We'll begin with 5 minutes of intro remarks from each of our panelists, and following that, I will open the discussion. I open the floor for the discussion. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we will pick you then. Okay, let's kick off. András, there has been a lot of talk about diplomacy lately. I mentioned also the potential ceasefire negotiations. Yet we should not forget that the fighting on the battlefield continues. So could you give us your assessment of the current military situation on the front lines in Ukraine, please? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Good morning to all of you. Thank you once again for joining us today morning. And in order to give you kind of a brief update on the military situation, please allow me to share a map. As usual, the map used by or produced by the Institute for the Study of War. This map, you do see the map, right? Very good, perfect. So this map shows the most critical section of the front line, namely the region around Pokrovsk here, and Mirnohrad around it. In late August or mid-August, Russian forces attempted a breakthrough up here in the north. By now, Ukraine managed to cope with that breakthrough, isolate it, and destroy some encircled Russia units. That's the light blue you see there. However, meanwhile, Russia managed to nearly complete the encirclement of Pokrovsk. And right now, Russia is concentrating all its forces into this direction with the operational objective of forcing Ukrainian units to abandon the pocket that has been formed around Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, and also a few smaller villages here. While on the map you see that it looks like that it's still possible to go in and out. In fact, all the supply routes are constant fire control of the Russians, including both artillery, mortars, and most importantly, drones. Here, the situation is extremely difficult. Russian forces already managed to enter Pokrovsk. Unless Ukraine manages, look at the map, unless Ukraine manages to take back considerable territory here, so basically to ease the pressure on Pokrovsk, then the city cannot be held much longer. So actually, this situation around Pokrovsk will be an important test for Ukraine's reshaped military leadership. You all know it. Ukraine recently introduced the army corps structure. There have been changes also in the top leadership of the military. Now, unfortunately, we will soon see whether this new leadership would be more flexible regarding giving up hardly holdable territories, hardly defendable territories than the previous structures. Why is Pokrovsk important? If we zoom out a bit, the reason why Pokrovsk, and here you have a more detailed map, you see that basically fire control is nearly completed. My private opinion would be that Ukraine needs to immediately evacuate Mirnohrad and everything south of it. Why the region is important? Because if Pokrovsk falls, from then on, Russians will have an access to the remaining territory of the Donbass. This map is the one we need. Pokrovsk is here. If Pokrovsk falls, Russians would be able to basically flank with the Northern War strike, flank the three fortress cities of the Donbass, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka. So holding Pokrovsk for Ukraine would be critically important for remaining able to hold the rest of the Donbass. Otherwise, the situation would get extremely complicated for Ukraine. Other sections of the front line also brought intensive battles in the last few weeks, particularly around Kupiansk up in the north. Situation is also fairly severe there. Russian forces already entered Kupiansk, and Ukraine still has some units on the eastern side of the river, but the situation in Kupiansk may force Ukraine to soon abandon that bridgehead on the eastern side of the river. Other sections of the front line are relatively calm or calmer. Basically, both sides concentrate all their best forces in the Pokrovsk direction. When it comes to the aerial war, Russia clearly has intensified air attacks in the last few weeks, and they are concentrating on Ukraine's energy sector, civilian energy sector, including power generation, energy transformation, transformer stations, all that. The Russian objective looks like, as it has been during the previous winters, to inflict large enough damage on Ukraine's energy network to basically make the network fall apart. So segmentate the network, make Ukraine unable to transform electricity from one part of the country to another one, and thereby create a major humanitarian crisis. How effective this is going to be, of course, the key variable is the weather, how hard the upcoming winter is going to be. The only basic reason for optimism is that Ukraine, as rude as it sounds, but in the last 3 winters, Ukrainian population and the government learned a lot about how to adapt themselves to these kind of hardships. First. Second, considerable efforts and resources have been put into diversifying Ukraine's energy system, making it more resilient to strikes. Still, Russians, by intensifying the number of strikes and also the accuracy of strikes, they might well be able to, at least temporarily, break the Ukrainian energy system apart. Cutting a long story short, very hard winter is awaiting Ukraine's civilian population, as well as, of course, the military industry, the infrastructure, and everything else. One last thing, now in the battlefield, and I just recently returned from eastern Ukraine. We were roughly 20 kilometers from Pokrovsk, conducting interviews, meeting ground troops there. Everything is now dominated by drones. The kill zone of FPV drones is like 10-15 kilometers from the front line, meaning in 10-15 kilometers from both directions, it's practically impossible to move by any vehicles. And now with the cold weather setting in, trees dropping their leaves, so the nature will offer a lot less cover, drones will see practically everything, even more than they have seen before. The likely result is that when the foliage disappears, so trees drop their leaves. They don't offer much more camouflage, much more cover. Damage inflicted by the drones will increase, and movement and basically all activities at the front line will slow down considerably because of the drone danger, combined with the bad weather and the famous Rasputitsa, or бездоріжжя in Ukrainian, so the mud season. So this is what's awaiting us. Basically, cutting a long story short, all eyes on Pokrovsk. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, András, for the update. Maybe just one follow-up question. Since you managed the attacks, the Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, how resilient would you say is the Ukrainian infrastructure at the moment? I mean, you said it, like Ukraine went through 3 winters of war already. But how resilient is the infrastructure, are the installations this ahead of winter? What would you say?
Even if I had the exact numbers, evidently we wouldn't be allowed to share it. Right now, it looks like that with managed long blackouts, rotating blackouts, which allows Ukrainian energy specialists to repair damaged systems, hopefully Ukraine will be able to prevent larger scale breakups of the system, but still a lot depends on Russia's ability to struck the smaller transformers. So this is basically on the edge. Experience gained in the last 3 winters gives reason for a bit of optimism. I mean, Ukrainian experts learned a lot about how to manage an energy system under intense military pressure and repeated damage and hits. Still, it's going to be critically hard.
Thank you. Stefan, turning to you now, Vladimir Putin described the US sanctions, and I quote, as an unfriendly act that does nothing to strengthen Russian-American relations. First of all, what is behind that rhetoric, and do you see right now any sign that Putin might change his strategy, or is there no sign that this will change in the forthcoming month?
Thank you, Tim. I will discuss this, what you ask. I wanted to go through key developments or key issues of the last of the last several weeks. It's on one hand, canceling the Budapest summit between Trump and Putin. It's the US sanctions. I think this is what you mean, against Lukoil and Rosneft, which is quite serious. And Putin's announcement that Russia has successfully tested its nuclear-powered and nuclear-capable Burevestnik missile and is also preparing to deploy it. And maybe also András can later say a couple of words about this weapon and in which way it makes anyway. So what kind of weapon is it? Yeah. So I think this is I think also important to understand. So on your question, I don't think Putin will change his strategy, and I don't think that he feels really so serious sanctions or actions by the US that he is forced in any way to change his policy. And I think a lot of what Trump is saying is not really what he's doing. So I think we have here really also we have here 2 leaders also impacting on the information sphere, impacting on the perceptions. I think this is very important to understand. If we're looking into Lukoil and Rosneft, I think the past years have shown that hitting oil companies will not force Russian President Putin to change his course on Ukraine. So these are not the first oil companies, and we all know that oil is the main source of income for the Russian state. But it has not changed the course in a different way. It has led to an adaptation also to the new situation. So it will only have a temporary effect on Russian oil exports, since Russia has the know-how to adapt to such sanctions. We all know the Shadow Fleet. For Putin, the war is not a pragmatic policy that only makes sense when the costs are too high. So I think, yes, it makes sense to impact his cost-benefit calculation. But for him, this war is a question of principle, how he sees himself and Russia's role in the world. So meaning he's willing to pay a high economic price to get for this symbolic capital to wage and win this war, which is far more important for him than the economic situation of Russia. Therefore, the Russian president will continue the war despite increasing economic problems and lost opportunities to end the war. We have this year a growth rate, what Sberbank forecasted, of 0.8% of the GDP. There's an increasing labor deficit in Russia. The numbers between 3 and million migrants, which are missing also to keep the economy working. So growth will not return soon. The welfare fund will run out next year, which was crucial to fill gaps also in the budget with this high military spending. But my thesis would be that will not change Putin's course of the war. But we all understand also that the sanctions were not about ending the war, but increasing the price for waging the war. So, and this is happening. The costs are growing for the Russian regime. Second point on the Budapest summit, or the likely Budapest summit, I think we have really a problem at the moment in the whole discussion about negotiations between the US and Russia, because there is a kind of perception that there is really an opportunity that negotiations could happen. And on one hand, maybe this war might end. But I think this is an illusion. I think there is no momentum, and I repeat myself here already on several occasions, there is no momentum for any negotiations at the moment from the Russian side. There are maximum demands from the Russian side. There is this understanding Russia can win the war. The US is not seriously sanctioning Russia and supporting Ukraine on a different scale. So I don't think there is this momentum, and all these discussions about summits are distractions from the reality of what's going on the front line, and helps also Russia to create an illusion that there might be an end, that we might have to support Ukraine less. I think it's key to understand that this is a longer war. We will have to support Ukraine in middle and long term, and we should not go on these wrong expectations that there is such a momentum. Last point on the Burevestnik announcement, which came 1 week after the US lifted the restrictions on the US long-range missiles for Ukraine, which helped Ukraine also to target Russian oil refineries and plants. I think Burevestnik is not, and maybe András also can say something on it, it's not a missile to use, but it's a missile to threaten, to show that Russia is strong, that it is impossible to win a war against such a powerful country. It's part of the disinformation and manipulation campaign, in my opinion. And at the same time, we should not underestimate also the domestic importance of these kind of announcements, where in a period where the society will increasingly suffer from the economic decline or economic situation in Russia, so it can create some kind of pride. I want to mention another point, I think, which is crucial, and we also should discuss maybe here in one special session. I think the Burevestnik announcement should be also viewed more related to Moscow's offer to extend the New START, the last remaining arms control treaty between the United States and Russia. And you saw in the context also of the meeting between Trump and Xi, the Chinese leader, that Trump announced also nuclear testing. So we are entering a new arms race where nuclear weapons are playing an important role. I think this is also the Russian way of playing a role in this arms race. The New START agreement expires in February. In September, Putin offered to extend existing limits on the numbers of deployed long-range missile weapons for 1 year. 1 year extension would also help the Kremlin to keep its resources focused on the war, and help on the war in Ukraine, while avoiding an expensive build-up of deploying weapons at a time when Russia's expensive war is straining its economy. So in this sense, it's all about building up leverage, since the weapon also can reach the US. So I think Putin is in a negotiation also with the US with this announcement. And I think we should really discuss also this nuclear arms race and a new stage also, which has a global scale, because also China is part of it. So I just end here.
Thank you, Stefan. You said the war will last longer, and it's an illusion to think there will be a quick end. One way for Europe to support Ukraine in resisting the Russian aggression, of course, would be to provide the frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. And I want to bring Iana in here. In a recent policy brief that you published, you looked at the implications of confiscating frozen Russian assets. And my question to you, my initial question is, what were your key findings? And perhaps you can also help us understand why the negotiations on using these assets to finance Ukraine are so difficult.
So if I'm allowed, I would like to start with discussing the context and stakes for Ukraine, like why we're talking about this so much. So according to the conservative baseline estimations, the external needs, like needs for external funding for Ukraine for 26-29 are around 156 billion of US dollars. And here we had 150 conditionally covered, but this provided that we get 87 billion approximately of US dollars as a reparation loan for this 3-year period. Like otherwise, this picture seems much more complicated and situation for Ukraine is much more challenging. So here I would also like to mention that for now, there is no such thing as predictable military financing because many sources of external help are actually not that reliable anymore. Here I'm talking about a pure program used to be financed by the US, but now things are much more complicated. So in 2024, Ukraine spent around $70 billion as defense spending. And right now there are very hot discussions in Ukraine how to increase the spending, because here we are talking about a remuneration for military staff, weapons, R&D expenditures, and so on. So any additional funding would be much appreciated. And talking about the costs of supporting Ukraine, there are much higher costs actually associated with playing for time, because in this case, you can either fund Ukraine with own taxpayers' money, which obviously would add to some debt pressure and probably some concerns as well. And considering current political situation, it actually might be quite challenging. Or European countries can raise their own defense spending up to the level they used to maintain during the Cold War. And according to Timothy Ash estimations, this might be even one additional trillion of euro for Europe annually, which is definitely much more expensive than supporting Ukraine now. So talking about this, considering how important it is, actually, we were really surprised that there is actually no good research regarding what might actually happen to the EU financial markets, provided that Russian assets are confiscated, or let's say quasi-confiscated, or used in order to support Ukraine. According to our findings, the effects are not that dramatic. Actually, here, when you compare the magnitude of the shock associated with news about the potential usage of Russian assets or even confiscation of Russian assets, potential confiscation, because there were some announcements about the ongoing tensions in Europe, but not about the decision to confiscate per se, obviously. Investors are not concerned that much, as they seem to be concerned based on what's highlighted in media and based on politician speeches. So we are talking about temporary increase in bond yields, 10-year bond yields. I would like to underline 2-year and 30-year bond yields seem to be not affected that much. It lasts for about several days. It reaches peak on the 4th day after the announcement. And when we expand the time frame analyzed, actually it roughly disappears within about 2 weeks, I would say 14 or 15 days. And by the very end, the cumulative shock is actually negligible. So if we want to find some real life comparison to check whether this is a lot or this is not that much, it's very comparable with some routine bad news for European investors, or let's say one notch decrease in credit rating. So definitely no massive financial shock, no substantial increase in bond yields. So yeah, investors seem to be more or less okay with this. So definitely we can see that markets react, but the magnitude of this reaction and the actual outcome in medium run is not comparable with how it is highlighted in media. So considering this, extremely high stakes for Ukraine and moderate and manageable risks for Europe, it's actually a mystery for us why it's such a complicated task to achieve some agreement on the further usage of Russian assets. Thank you. I will be happy to answer any further questions if you have them.
Thank you so much. I would like to pick up a question already from the chat, and I see that András already answered that, but perhaps we can do that here also in the panel. So the question from Roland Freudenstein is, what would it take for Putin to consider substantially changing his position, stop attacking, and maybe even partially withdrawing? András, if you want to start, and maybe Stefan, you also mentioned that the economic pressure will not be enough, and I was already wondering what then. So perhaps you both could, beginning with András, could answer that question. Over to you.
Thank you, Roland. It's always nice to get questions from an old friend. And I think that the key variable is the Kremlin's regime security calculus. All authoritarian systems are primarily interested in maintaining their own regime security. So the question is not the military development per se, but how this affects the sustainability and manageability of the Russian regime itself. So the question is, what would be those costs that would make Putin think that closing the war is actually more beneficial for his regime than continuing it? And this is not inflicting more manpower losses. This is not inflicting more military hardware losses, because Russia has turned out to be fairly resilient to both. Second, as the nature of war has been changing, they need less and less heavy weaponry on the front line. They are gradually running out of modern heavy weaponry, but in this drone-dominated warfare, modern ground weapons matter less and less. So if I were to give kind of an advice, which I don't do, I would advise that the vulnerability, the point to hit, is Russia's energy sector, more intensive, repeated, more destructive and longer range strikes on the energy sector, particularly the oil industry. And all elements matter. I mean, most of the drones Ukraine has been using, less than 5% of the Ukrainian drones actually reach their targets. Russian air defense is fairly efficient. Second, most Ukrainian drones carry only very light warheads, a few kilograms. But in order to inflict lasting damage, much larger warheads would be needed. And in order to achieve even an operational effect, not to mention strategic effect, sustained air campaign is needed against the same target. You need to hit it over and over again in order to inflict cumulative damage. So setting an oil refinery on fire looks good in the news, but unless Ukraine is able to do that in every week, the same oil refinery setting on fire the same refinery, the effect will be limited. So I think the way to go is to increase the number of strikes, the destructive power of the strikes, and also the range of the strikes. So a lot more destructive weapons are needed, probably ideally with a higher survivability rate, because Russia also learned a lot about air defense against drones. Roland asked about Tomahawks and Tauruses. The answer is no and no. With Taurus, I'm not commenting. I'm never comment on German debates. When it comes to the Tomahawk, Ukraine doesn't have anything to fire them from, because Tomahawk is primarily a naval platform. Ukraine doesn't have the ships or the submarines that could fire the Tomahawk. There exist a few land-based Tomahawks, but even the US has very few of them. The maximum number of cruise missiles the United States could provide would be like 20, 40 per month, which is just not enough. Not to mention training, logistics, and all these things. Possibly Flamingo if produced in big enough numbers. Flamingo is a long-range, fairly destructive weapon, but it's vulnerable to jamming. It's not advanced technology. It's better than anything that Ukraine had before, but still fairly vulnerable to Russian air defense fire. So Flamingo would be a good way if the West could help Ukraine to properly mass produce it. Again, more strikes, more destructive strikes on a longer range, all that repeated. That's the way to go.
Mm-hmm. I would also react if it's fine. I think just on Taurus, one sentence. The German way now is not supplying Taurus, but helping Ukraine to build its own long-range missiles. I think this is the policy we see, so that Ukraine is by itself capable and also is able to scale up, because this is the main challenge, to scale up production of weapons, of drones, and so on. So I think this is what is discussed here, and I think where we are moving also now. On cost benefit, or on the calculation of the war, yes, it's regime survival, but I think it's more than this. It's also about Putin's role in history. It's also about how Putin sees the world, and how much he's willing really to take high costs for this, and let also his own society suffer. And I think they managed it quite well until now. So I think it's a mix of several elements. So as I said, sanctions are not about ending the war, but it is about increasing the costs for the war. And I think we are working on this, and we need further work on this. And then it's the battlefield, and it's the military costs for Russia, and arming Ukraine and strengthening Ukraine in a way that it's getting more and more costly for Russia to attack, and also Ukraine capable to hit Russian infrastructure. So I think there is no one solution. There is a mix of solutions, and we are still not there also in terms of, for instance, producing air defense systems. Why we are not producing the numbers of air defense systems in the fourth year of the war? Yeah. So why Patriot, why Boeing is not able to produce more? Because there is no okay from the US government to produce more and to export more, and also on other air defense. So I think these are the old discussions, but I think there are weapons, there are air defense systems which would help Ukraine in many ways to protect also during this winter its infrastructure, and it's not supplied, it's not produced. So I think that's where it goes. I wanted to react also on the frozen assets, because we had a discussion at the Bell Foundation this week, also with other sanction experts. I think we are moving towards using these frozen assets for Ukraine. It's just that Belgium is where this company is. Is raising the stakes in a way that they want to have the insurance that they have not to pay if Russia is going to a court. So I think what we see now is the European Commission pressuring the member states, making a compromise here, with all negative consequences if Ukraine is not getting this money. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure that this money will come. It's just a matter of time. It's a matter of bargaining among the member states and how to secure also the Belgium state. I think just one sentence. The question is how to use this money. Should it be, and we discussed it, I want to quote also with Benjamin Hilkenstock, who's also associate fellow at the DGAP. The question also how to use this money. Should it just go into the weapons and getting burned for the next year, or should not maybe part go also into reconstruction, or should be go into the market to earn more money to give this to Ukraine? So I think we should also think about how to more sustainable use this money to support Ukraine in longer term and not just at this moment of the war.
Thank you, and maybe I can pass that question on to Iana on how to use that money from a Ukrainian public spending perspective. What are the needs here, and where should the money be spent if it can be used?
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Actually, I would love to answer this question. There are debates regarding the potential use of these assets right now in Ukraine. However, I believe that creating some kind of sovereign wealth fund would be probably the best option. Later, we can, of course, we can negotiate on different mechanisms on how to ensure transparency and proper use and so on and so forth. But when it comes to future reconstruction, I adore your optimism. It's essential at this point to make sure that Ukraine is not defeated. And this kind of cost-benefit analysis, although it seems rational and definitely something, and definitely the question you need to raise, but probably it's too early to discuss any massive post-war reconstruction while the war is still ongoing, and future perspectives are very, very uncertain and very unclear. But yeah, I think that some kind of sovereign wealth fund, like probably Timothy has suggested, some kind of aura agency for reconstruction and access of Ukraine to EU would be a very appropriate option for now. And the remaining things, they can be subject to negotiation with the EU partners.
Thank you. And we have 3 questions already in the audience. Please mute yourself. Thank you. So we have 3 questions from the audience, and I will begin with my colleague Nastya here from DGAP.
Thank you very much for your inputs. I have a few questions, but I will restrain myself to 2. And so I've also just returned from Ukraine. And when I was there were also attacks on infrastructure and as well blackouts. And András, I wanted to ask you for regarding Pokrovsk, what would it mean if Pokrovsk is taken by Russian also, because it has been such a crucial point in this war? And also, I mean, how do you see it impacting also the morale of the army? Because Russia, I think, will try to sell it as a big win. And Stefan, I have a question to you. How do you see this discussion now evolving? We've seen also in the media that since now young men can also leave Ukraine until the mobilization age, we also see this discussion that there are too many Ukrainians in Germany, which I think is very much populist and very damaging narrative. But how do you see that going forward? And also putting this in the context of the ongoing attacks on infrastructure. So whoever can answer, do you expect more people leaving Ukraine this winter? I know that we discuss this every winter, but I think this winter also has started early and it's been fairly cold already in October.
Okay, first question was to András, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Nastya, and I'm glad to see that you returned safe and sound. When it comes to the question of Pokrovsk, if The main moral impact on the army would not be if Pokrovsk is given up in a managed, organized way, along military logic, when there is a second or third fortification line built behind it. So, I mean, if you're fighting an enemy which is overpowering you, from time to time you have to retreat. An organized retreat, a professional retreat, which the Ukrainian army is clearly capable of, would not have that much of a moral damage. What would have a moral damage is the Bakhmut number 2, the Avdiivka number 2. So if they decide to hold the city way longer than it is feasible, leading to unnecessary and avoidable losses, that would have a devastating moral impact. And in order to assess the operational impact, it's useful again to look at the map. I'm sharing a map. This is basically the map around. Here is Pokrovsk, and here are the most important cities: Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, Drushkivka, so the fortress belt, basically. If Pokrovsk falls, north of Pokrovsk, there is basically no any major settlement, nor any defensible natural border. So what would happen in that case if Pokrovsk falls? Russians would probably move northwards with a northward thrust towards Barvinkove and cut off the entire fortress belt from the rest of Ukraine. That's why holding Pokrovsk is critical. Because once Pokrovsk falls, there is nothing, no other properly fortified city or no other major natural barrier that could hold up the Russians. Even not this kind of lake district is just too small. Russians would be able to circumvent it. So that's the main significance of holding Pokrovsk. And again, really the question is whether, okay, this map shows you the best. So Dobropilia, north of Pokrovsk, it's a village. The map overstates it in terms of size. If Pokrovsk falls, there is nothing else north of it that could prevent the Russians from basically cutting off the entire fortress belt. So my estimation is that Ukraine will try to open up or soften the Russian envelopment around Pokrovsk and hold the city as long as possible.
Thank you, very helpful. And then the second question to you, Stefan.
András, maybe you can say something also about the Burevestnik on one point, just 2 or 3 sentences, but can do it also later. So I think for me it's also a question about the mobilization and the mobilization system in Ukraine, and I think there is a huge demand of forces of soldiers, yeah, in Ukraine, and it's also about training. It's also about the situation on the front line, and I think even if Ukraine is changing, reforming its system, I think it's still not in a good shape. It's also about the equipment. It's also about the opportunities to recover and to return for soldiers from the front line. And it's also about a trade-off between demographic situation of Ukraine, which is very, very difficult, and the situation in the war where just more soldiers are needed. Just I think, because this is for me the overall discussion. What we saw last year, just to go directly to your question, is that many people in wintertime left and then returned also in springtime. So it's not that people just completely leaving. A lot of people also have relatives, but it's also they also see what happens in Ukraine. So it's not that that people just leaving forever. And I think you need to create conditions for the army with regard to the mobilization, that they can increase the numbers also of soldiers. And I think we should rather think about this, because if you have these restrictive measures, then you have corruption. Then you have other means to leave the country. So I think it's about other questions than just people leaving and they are lost. I don't think this is with the majority the case.
Thank you. And we have a second question from the audience, Mihai Gabriel Kranițu. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I have a question related to Europe in general. So within this highly complex context and complex situations, what is the probability that France and the UK not only extend their nuclear umbrella to other European countries, but also create the possibility for Poland or other European nations to possess nuclear equipment capable of deterring the Russian Federation? Thank you.
Is the question targeted at a specific speaker?
No.
Okay. Then I would... Stefan, perhaps.
András, or you want? I don't...
Mihai, thank you for the question. I have no idea. I see the relevance of the question, but I'm a Russia-Ukraine nerd. I don't know much about European nuclear forces, so I'm not able to help you with that. I'm sorry.
I'm also not a specialist on nuclear policy, but my reading would be it will not happen. I don't think that these two countries will share their nuclear capabilities. It's a very sensitive issue. They're also very specific also to merger in a way this nuclear shield of France and UK. I think it's difficult and maybe even not possible. So I don't think they will share the technology or they will deploy nuclear weapons at this point. I still think what we should discuss, and many people may criticize me also for it, to how to protect maybe how to extend the air defense of NATO into Ukrainian territories or parts of Ukrainian territories at least, because that would also protect the eastern member states. I think that's a difficult question, but I think that's something really something to discuss. But on nuclear, I'm very skeptical.
Thank you. And next up is Klaus Wittmann.
There I am. Yes, good morning. I have a question to András and Stefan regarding our public discourse about the war against Ukraine. Those who are critical of military assistance to Ukraine argue with the argument that this is needless and prolongs the war. And the argumentation, especially, for instance, Wagenknecht and her reference generals Kuyat and Fahd, their argumentation hinges on the nimbus of Russian invincibility. I have held for a long time that this nimbus has been destroyed at least through the Kursk offensive by Ukraine, with the totally helpless Russian reaction to what, after all, was the first military occupation of Russian soil since World War II. Now, in this context, I come back to what you discussed earlier. All kinds of deep strike weapons are of the essence, and not only against the oil refineries, but against military supply chains on the Russian side, against command posts, military airports, launching sites, and the drone industry. And I would be curious what you think about this Russian invincibility and what one could do in contrast to that theory, to that nimbus.
Thank you. Let's start with András.
Thank you, General. When it comes to the myth of Russian invincibility, I think myth is a good expression. And the problem with myths and religious beliefs and all these things, that rational arguments rarely help. I mean, Russian military history is full, even post-Soviet Russian military history is full of spectacular defeats. The First Chechen War, Battle of Grozny, some battles also in the Second Chechen War, the entire siege of Kyiv. Ukraine defeated the Russian army several times. So facts actually contradict the myth. But because this is a belief, I don't think that there is any way to rationally debate the people who spread these narratives. Instead, I wouldn't try to argue with these people because, again, it's pointless. Instead of arguing with them, I would argue with their audience. and spread it over and over again that yes, the Russian army can be defeated and actually is getting defeated. I mean, what is the definition of victory? And sir, you know it much better than I do. The definition of victory is if we are able to force our will to the adversary. And Russia has clearly been not able to force its will on Ukraine. Ukraine is standing, Ukraine is defending herself, and Ukraine will stand. So what kind of Russian invincibility are we talking about? Second thing about deep strikes, I absolutely agree. There one can define, and this list is already defined, a list of priority targets, including command posts, aircrafts, drone industry, all that. The question is the availability of the long-range strike weapons. Because Ukraine doesn't have enough long-range strike weapons, and that's why it's important what Stefan said. The Germany is helping Ukraine to mass produce Ukraine's own weapons. As long as there is not enough long-range strike weapons, priorities need to be set. And in order to affect Putin's regime security calculations, I think all industry is a key target. And Stefan's remark about the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile, to cut a long story short, even if it exists in the form that Russians try to make us believe it exists, this is not more than an experimental system, and there would be loads of question marks about the possible deployment of it. Give you one example, because it's nuclear powered and because it's relatively small, the problem of shielding the radiation is not solved. The nickname Flying Chernobyl is not a coincidence. If this thing flies, Russians say it flies, it contaminates everything along the flight path. Even turning it on would be dreadfully dangerous to its own personnel who are operating it. So I'm very skeptical about the very existence of the Burevestnik, even if this test flight. Norwegian intelligence confirmed that there was a launch from Novaya Zemlya, so Russians tested something, but so far there is no sign of any nuclear contamination which would have indicated that such a system was flying actually with nuclear power. So I agree with Stefan, this weapon, even if it exists, it's more an informational tool. The same is true for the other doomsday weapon, the Poseidon nuclear torpedo.
Thank you.
It's basically an information operation. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 8 minutes left, and before we make a final round, I would like to, we talked now a lot about the military situation, to come back at least for 5 minutes to the, I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but the potential ceasefire agreement and the diplomatic side. We know that territory and security guarantees remain the two critical aspects here. But perhaps you could remind us, perhaps Stefan, of the main disagreements here between sort of the Russian side and the Ukrainian side here, and if you see any room for compromise that could pave the way for an agreement.
No, I think we have no change in the Russian demands, so no offer for any kind of compromise. And I think the main demand is not only not join NATO, but in the end become a neutral state, disarm Ukraine. We're talking about a regime change, denazification, how they call it. So I think it is about the very existence of Ukraine as an independent state. So I don't see here any way of compromise from the Ukrainian side. If you challenge in the end the choice also of Ukrainian society being an independent and sovereign state. So I don't see any move from the Russian side towards a compromise where we can say this is something which is maybe for sometimes acceptable. We have a ceasefire and then we will negotiate on certain kind of issues. But there are maximum demands, and this has not changed. And I think the regime in Moscow thinks they can win this war. And I think also what András said before, we have to change this logic also, that they have the impression that they can really win the war. There is not enough Western support for Ukraine, not sustainable enough. Yes, Ukraine is maybe lacking people and troops, but it is also about scaling up production, arming. I think it's one of the best trained and experienced armies in Europe. So I think there is a big shift going on also in Ukraine with regard to its abilities to defend itself, to fight. And I think we have an interest to integrate this Ukraine also into our security and defense system, and to learn also and also to deter Russia in a very different way. So I think we really need to change the logic also how we think about Ukraine, not as a problem, but as a not only as a defender also of our own security, but also as an asset for our own way to increase defense capabilities and our abilities also to defend ourselves without the US, maybe on one point in future.
Okay, thank you. And we've got, okay, there's one more question in the chat. Let me just, it's quite long. So question maybe to Iana, but open to all who may contribute. Which part of government task would you expect the Ukrainian government to cut first, or how else would you expect the Ukrainian government to keep financing the war effort if the financial help from Europe fails to materialize? So perhaps you can take that question, Iana, before we do the final round. So if you could limit your answer to about 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. I think I will even take less because as for now, I do not think there is any area of government spending to cut substantially to optimize in order to increase military spending. So roughly 100% of internal revenues in Ukraine are assigned to military spending. And I do not know what else can be done in order to do something in short run. Of course, there are many talks about like shadowing of the economy, optimizing the taxation system, and so on, but none of them will work in short run perspective. We are talking about medium run and long run, and we desperately need money for now.
Okay, thank you for the short answer. We've got 3 minutes left, and before we close, I'd like each of you to finish one short sentence. I would suggest we go in reverse order and start with you, Iana, and conclude with András. The sentence is, in order to put Ukraine in a favorable negotiating position, European leaders must now. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about, and
transfer frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, of course.
I was expecting that. Okay, thank you. Then over to Stefan.
I think what I have said, to help Ukraine to scale up the production of drones, long-range missiles, and really have its own industry, which has also with European funding and also know-how to scale up production.
Now we have actually more minutes left than I expected. So András, if you can also be a little bit longer, or the others can add more to their answers.
I fully agree with Stefan. For Europe, the way to go is to keep Ukraine in the fight and help Ukraine defend herself more efficiently. The key lies in upscaling Ukraine's own defense production in Ukraine and also outside Ukraine, including, one more thing, interceptor drones. Huge numbers of interceptor drones, hundreds of thousands of them. Cheap, reliable, mass-produced, preferably AI-guided interceptor drones, because this is the cheapest and most efficient way of countering the threat of Russian mass drone strikes. Mark my words, we are weeks away from the first 1,000-drone strike that Russia will launch against Ukraine. They are really messing up the guidelines to deliver decisive strikes on Ukraine's energy industry. And what happened in Poland also demonstrates the need for cheap and reliable counter-drone solutions. And here the European interest is not only to help Ukraine stay in the fight, but also to learn from Ukraine. Because at present, they know the most about modern warfare. So I see here very closely interconnected mutual interest. And that's also an argument to the Ukraine skeptics. that we really need to do this.
Thank you. So I will give all of you 1 extra minute today. We close 1 minute earlier. I'd like to thank our panelists for their excellent contributions. Thank you very much. We will return next Thursday with our next morning briefing, and thank you for joining us today. Have a good day. Goodbye.